Welcome to Queen City Cyber Consulting's channel.
Hello, and welcome back to Queen City Cyber Consulting, where we discuss cybersecurity, targeting primarily digital forensics and incident response, but who knows what we will get into. But for the purpose of today's video, I want us to take a look at how you can identify patient zero. Now, just like with a real world epidemic, a cyber intrusion is not much different. One of the goals of incident response and digital forensics is to figure out what system in the environment is patient zero. And that provides you with a ton of helpful information from the initial cause, to possible victims within the environment, within the enterprise. For example, passwords stolen, passwords reused, whatever it may be. And gives you a way to be able to figure out where to restore your network to. In other words, you don't want to restore a network from a compromised backup. You want to know for sure that your backups are clean as well, which means you need to be able to identify patient zero and what happened on it. There is a methodology to this, and it's basically working backwards from the point of detection and then working sort of in a time reverse loop to figure out what actually happened. How they got in, how they established their initial foothold. You're looking for indicators of compromise. You're looking for indicators of attack. Remember that video, IOCs and IOAs all come into play here. This is where you're going to be building those symptoms of the infection so that you can identify other systems within the enterprise and then better protect them as well. So what are some of the primary initial access vectors? And this gives you a nice broad list, excuse me, to work off of. Of course, phishing and social engineering are massive methods that attackers use to get into environments. They can weaponize email attachments. There's malicious external links that you have to be aware of. There's credential harvesting portals, which we'll deal with in another video if you're not familiar with that. There's public-facing exploitation. All those systems that sit out on the internet are what are called public-facing. And that could be anything from VPN gateways to routers to firewalls. I mean, SonicWall has had vulnerabilities released this year. It almost seems weekly at this point, but not necessarily weekly, but many times. Last year, especially in 2025, these unpatched systems with vulnerabilities were getting breached left and right. I couldn't even tell you how many investigations I was involved with dealing with unpatched systems with vulnerabilities on them. So public-facing exploitations, probably number two. Stolen credentials. Again, happens fairly frequently out there. We've been training employees and end users on not reusing their passwords. Unfortunately, that just doesn't click and take. Or, I mean, again, just today, I was in a institution and had access to a laptop from someone high up in the institution. And right there on the laptop, in little sticky notes, are the username and passwords for a variety of different programs that that person needed access to. Well, guess who else has access to them now? I would have if I was an unethical hacker. I could easily take a picture of that and use those to further compromise their system. And then there is finally supply chain intrusion. Those have become rather big too. I worked several of them in the past. That's where a third party vendor, a managed service provider, or something like that gets breached, and then they push out a malicious update uh, downstream to all of their customers. And that is rather big. Some of those in the past have been huge, involved thousands upon thousands of companies that receive the compromised download. So, all of these, what this is to give you an idea of where to begin thinking about the intrusion vector. How did they get in? So, of these four, you can pretty much narrow down what happened. You want to talk to, say, the person that maybe set the alert off in the first place, find out what they saw, what they did. Did they click a suspicious phishing email? Did they go to a suspicious website? uh, were their credentials found in an online dump somewhere? Um, all things to keep in mind and be asking as you go through the incident response process and do your investigation. Now, this is by no means in depth, but these are some key digital forensic artifacts to look for. You've got several here on the screen. You've got endpoint event logs with different Windows event IDs that you can go out and look for, like 4624 is logon types 3 and 10, event 7045, which is one of my favorites to go look for. That's service creation. Event 4104, PowerShell script block logging. Whew, that's a tongue twister. Say that 10 times fast. Those are your event logs, and believe you me, that's not all of them. There are many others. In fact, probably there'll be several videos forthcoming just on window event logs and what to look for. And that doesn't even deal with Mac or Linux that could be present in an environment. Memory and file system is another great one. Your master file table has timestamps on it of programs installed and executed. Your USN journal, your SIM cache, your AM cache, your prefetch, all provide what they call binary execution dates. The thing I want to stress in this video here at this point, though, is you need to have a holistic view of this. You can't just take, say, a prefetch entry and run with it and say, this proves execution. It doesn't necessarily prove that. You have to have it in other formats as well. And Windows systems actually do a pretty good job of recording information, whether it's your event logs, whether it's in your memory or your file system information. It's there. You, as the investigator, the forensics analysis analyst, you need to be able to find them and explain them. That's what it comes down to. And then, of course, you have network information and any boundary systems like VPN authentication logs, secure email gateway logs, any proxy logs, anything along those lines, firewall logs, all those things can be super helpful in tracing back what happened. Now, remember, you're working backwards at this point. The breach already occurred. The alert was already sent. You realized more was done than what you initially may have thought, and now you're working backwards. So all these things are historical points in time that you can use as an analyst, as an investigator, to determine what happened. Why is it valuable to do rapid root cause analysis? Well, given that the average dwell time, and this is constantly changing, is around 204 days. And what that means is that the attackers have been sitting in the network for around 200 days or so, give or take, prior to detection. They were there. They were lurking. They were watching. They were taking information. And it wasn't until something happened that kicked off that initial alert. And usually it's a little later in the kill chain, so like during lateral movement, or they try to dump creds, or they start executing ransomware. Well, they've already been there. If they're executing ransomware or doing credential dumping, you better just make the assumption right off the bat that they've been there for a while. And we always do that in our investigations. Uh, it's never at that time of the alert. That's never the initial breach point. It always comes sometime before that. So if you can identify patient zero pretty quickly, then that gives you a pretty good path to plugging the initial access hole. In other words, was it phishing? Was it a vulnerability that was unpatched? Whatever it may have been. And then you can also start discovering persistence mechanisms across the enterprise and work to shut those down, which you have to do during an incident response process. Or guess what? They'll just come back. I mean, they set these things up so that they can come back. Your job is to shut them down. For instance, growing up, we hunted groundhogs. And a lot of times people make the assumption that groundhogs aren't all that smart, but in reality, they are. Their dens always have at least two different escape routes. You may find one that the groundhog ducks into when he sees you, because they usually see you first, but there's another way out, if not two more. And you're sitting and watching the hole he disappeared into, and meanwhile he pops out of another hole behind you and is laughing down his snout at you because you're watching the wrong hole. You don't want to get caught in that scenario doing incident response. You need to realize that oftentimes attackers will set up persistent access mechanisms so they can come back and do evil again. Doing host level investigation, again, you want to look at authentication audits, look for any unusual type 10 or RDP login events, type 3 network login events, mostly coming from either external or unrecognized internal IP addresses. And that's important to bear in mind, these unrecognized internal IP addresses, because they may have another system on the network that they're using. And sometimes the internal IT staff doesn't know what all's running on their network. And if you can spot something like that, that gives you a pretty good insight into what's going on. And of course, script block logging. For example, if they're trying to run obfuscated PowerShell or VB script or command line, loaders are spawning just before the alerts, that's a bad sign. Master file table timestamp analysis. Always check it for time stomping or just getting a good timeline build up on what happened on that particular system leading up to the attack. And of course, browser forensics are very important because you need to know what the user was visiting. Was it a malicious website? Did they download something suspicious at some point or the other? So any user-initiated downloads can be extremely valuable in this investigative process. So again, here's a step-by-step isolation workflow. Your baseline, time zero. Mark the earliest known alert. Just mark it. That's the beginning of your timeline. Bang, right there. Then you begin looking past. Remember, we're going backwards in time. Now, during an active incident, you're going to have two timetables going on here. You're going to have that analyst going backwards. You're also going to have analysts moving forward and hoping and looking for any signs of ongoing infection. Then you do your reverse look back, looking in the hours, days leading up to that initial alert. Then check your parent-child process tree to hopefully find which application spawned this alert and then where did it come from. See how you're moving backwards in time. And then you do your enterprise-wide IOC sweep. As you develop your IOCs through your investigative process, you're going to go search the entire enterprise, looking for any other instances of the attacker moving through the environment. These are just a couple of different examples. This would be like, this would be similar. Well, it is the exploit vector pattern. So you've got w3wp.exe spawning command.exe, which would be your command line, and then starting certutil.exe. So when your public facing web services or even database services spawn these command shells or file transfer tools, the entry vector is the application exploitation. So they exploited this application, W3WP, in order to move through their process. This is the attacker in action. Same thing with phishing. They opened up a phishing email. They tried to download a document. This is just an example. It could be a PDF file. It could be an Excel spreadsheet. It could be any number of things. But here it's winword.exe, which spawns PowerShell. Now, I don't know about you, but anytime I see WinWord or Word spawning PowerShell, I get the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, because that just shouldn't happen routinely. And then PowerShell usually leads to payload.exe, which that's a generic term. It'll have any number of formats there, but that's how they get in, and that's what you should be actually looking for. So for frequency, again, we looked at these just a little bit ago. You got phishing and malicious links are running at around 38% for initial access. Your exploited vulnerabilities are right there behind them at 29%. Your compromised credentials are 22%, and then your supply chain third party are more down around 11%. Now you have to take threat intelligence into play here as well, because there may be a known supply chain attack ongoing. So you may be able to immediately not worry about the top three and move right to supply chain, especially if it's that MSP, that managed service provider, that was breached. That's what's leading to multiple breaches. Well, then that's where you would really start your search and take into account what's going on out there in the real world as well. Patient zero is rarely where the threat was first detected. Detection happens on down the kill chain, and containment begins at root cause, and that's important. Containment has to begin at root cause. You may identify patient zero, but what made that system patient zero? That's where your containment begins. Was it a phishing email? Was it an MSP? Was it an unpatched vulnerability that was taken advantage of? That's where your containment actually starts, right then and there. So your expansion and scope and containment, of course, you want to go enterprise wide. Once you begin developing your IOCs, and that can include everything from your execution artifacts to your command and control IPs, file hashes. You're going to be plugging those over into your EDRs and your SIEMs and scanning the rest of the network, looking for any other systems that may have been touched by or accessed by the attackers. And once they're in a system, they never just sit there and do very little. They're always stealing credentials. All kinds of things are happening in there, and you're going to find that during your forensic review and analysis. And that's where really you want to end this process at. So, hey, please comment, ask some questions, discuss what's going on. But root cause analysis is definitely one of the most vital things to understand and know. And you'll see it on certification tests. You'll also be hit with it during interviews for jobs. It's big out there. So prepare yourself. Be ready. Watch this video. Watch other videos that are coming out and dig deep. Dig deep. So, Queen City Cyber Consulting signing off. Y'all have a great day. Go forth and conquer.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.